The opposite of this is also true. So you find your heart rate. You start to exhale and you feel your heart rate slowing down. And as you don't inhale, you extend that pause, that control. After the exhalation, before the inhalation, that's when your heart rate is its most manipulable. You'll be able to slow it the most. Like Debussy said about music being the space between notes. High athletic performance is the space between your heartbeats. So the longer that you can stretch out those beats per minute, the longer that you can stretch out that variability, the better you're going to perform. So find out where that base heart rate is through your exhalation and control pause. And you've basically found out what biofeedback is. As you put the breath in front of that team of sled dogs, as you make it the alpha dog, you have control over your heart rate. As you have control over your heart rate, you have control over your athletic performance. That's the simplified version. But if you want to dramatically improve your performance, understanding the numerical values behind it, you'll be able to manipulate it even farther. And that's, I stumbled upon this. It's an invaluable technique to my clients now. Just understand the first and most critical aspect is your maximum heart rate. This is a generalization. So if you take 220 minus your age, let's say you're 20 years old, then 200 would be your maximum heart rate. That's your generalization. It's not very accurate. But if there are much more accurate formulae out there, like 217 minus your age times 0.85. And there are even more accurate formulae from that. But just generically, 220 minus your age will equal your maximum heart rate. What happens is, for people that don't have the appropriate type of conditioning, or move into an event that's new to them, or they face a sudden crisis, they face an opponent that makes them feel overwhelmed, if they feel they're outclassed, they're outmatched. This is why the psychological and emotional game is so critical. If you feel like you've made a mistake and you can't recover from your mistake, if you're behind the hammer and you're falling farther and farther and farther behind, this is all controllable from our breath. What happens is our heart rate jumps. If it goes over to max heart rate, let's say you're the 20-year-old athlete, and your maximum heart rate should be 200. Once it crests 200, then your central nervous system takes over. It doesn't like what's happened. It views this as a threat. And then your reflex takes over. Then your nervous system hijacks, your central nervous system hijacks your control, your voluntary control, pushes you into the passenger seat and takes over driving. It releases certain chemicals, neuropeptides, neurotransmitters that tell the endocrine system to start cooking. This is a problem. So it starts squeezing on your glands. It starts squeezing on your adrenal system, so it starts dumping all of this super fuel into your bloodstream. But that epinephrine, that adrenaline, once it's in your system, it causes a whole array of uncontrollable byproducts. That's fine. If you were in a crisis, if you were in a car wreck, or if you had no skills as an athlete or as a fighter, and suddenly you were thrust into, say, a self-defense situation, this is a genetic gift to have that chemical cocktail dumped into your bloodstream. But as a highly skilled athlete, as a high performance engine, if you were to have jet fuel dumped into your gas tank, it's most likely going to burn hot and fast, but then explode. Because for a survival reflex, just surviving the next minute's what's important, not your career longevity and not winning the match, not having access to these refined skills. If your heart rate jumps above maximum, your nervous system assumes that your skills are not sufficient. Your skills are not good enough to handle this. So I need to take over and give you these basal reflexes. That's not a reflection on your skill. It's just what your nervous system decides. It's a reflection on your conditioning. You can be an elite athlete conditioned for the wrong fight, prepared for the wrong event, ready for the wrong mountain, and then thrust into that situation, your nervous system hijacks and takes over. When you have that flood of chemicals in your system, you can have auditory exclusion. This host of chemical phenomena that happens. Auditory exclusion is where you can't hear anything if but one thing. Let's say you can only hear the wrong thing, like your opponent's coach telling him exactly what your opponent needs in order to defeat you, instead of you being able to hear not only your coach but also the referee. That's all just cleared out. You can have visual exclusion too, which we call tunnel vision. You can only see the one portion of your opponent, or one portion of the court, the field, the ring, the octagon, whatever it be. The problem with that is you need to be able to pan across everything. If you're focused down on one thing, that's a problem. The reason that developed genetically, we needed the ability to fixate on what the threat is. So everything zooms in and we get blinders on and just focused on that one thing. That's fine in lieu of no skill, but because of your high degree of skill, if your heart rate goes above maximum, you're only going to be able to focus on one thing at a time. You get fixated on trying to attack the one technique or trying to counter the one thing. And by the time you go to counter that thing that's already transpired, your opponent's several steps down the road. So as your heart rate goes above max, tunnel vision happens. And there's a whole slew of psychological phenomena that happen, weird things like tachypsychia, where your time either slows down or it speeds up. You feel like you're moving through molasses while your opponent is moving at the speed of light. All of those phenomena can be avoided by keeping your heart rate underneath maximum. To do that, we can understand biofeedback will have an impact on that. So the first thing that I found is by improving recovery heart rate in between rounds, or after performance of training, or after performance of your actual event, improving how fast you recover from maximal heart rate will start to have a transferable impact into actual performance. So, and what I mean by recovery heart rate, how fast your heart rate recovers down from maximum heart rate determines how well you perform. So if your heart rate is 200, you're that 20-year-old athlete, and your max heart rate is 200. Let's say you begin conditioning in the reset with the reset technique, and your resting heart rate is 80 beats per minute. Your functional heart reserve is 200 minus 80, so 120. You have 120 beats to play with, right? How fast you recover down to that resting heart rate determines how well you can remain in access to 100% of your skills. And I've said this many times, that my goal as a coach is to give you 100% access to your skills for 100% of the fight. To do that, you need to stay underneath max. We can do that by manipulating your breath. I found that initially, I was just recovering down out of max. So once they learned the technique, my athletes were, in one case, the average, my athlete was recovering his heart rate 60 beats in 30 seconds. Now that may not mean anything to you until you understand that the average athlete recovers his heart rate 19 beats per minute in 60 seconds. So if using the reset technique, you're recovering your heart rate in 60 beats per minute in 30 seconds, you have 6 times the recovery rate as your opponent. You recover 6 times faster than your opponent. Now, you may think, well, that's going to require an inordinate amount of time. This is just adding 1 minute of practicing this technique in between rounds. 1 minute. So instead of just standing there and trying to catch your breath before you do your next conditioning bout of 5 minutes, you're practicing this recovery technique. So you're not adding anything. You're just taking that 1 minute of complete rest, which does you absolutely no good, and implementing the reset technique. you'll find that you're recovering your heart rate so much faster. Once you've practiced that technique sufficiently, there's another very strange and very important phenomenon that's going to happen. Your nervous system will start to recover in anticipation of rest. I'll say that again. Your nervous system will cause you to recover in anticipation of a rest period coming. If you train specific for an event, let's say your title shot is 5-minute rounds with 60 seconds break in between, and you've trained, let's just say absolutely specific, you've trained your conditioning for 5-minute rounds with 1 minute of rest in between. At around 4 minutes, maybe 4 minutes 30 seconds, your heart rate will start to drop as you start to accelerate in performance. What typically happens? Right. As the round goes on, you start to go down. You start to decelerate and start to break and start to move through the sludge and the molasses. Well, what I've found through implementing this technique is that my fighters were accelerating through the round, accelerating to the end and improving in performance while they were recovering. If you continue that, if you continue to practice that so that your nervous system is now rewiring in anticipation of rest, what will happen is during the fight you're recovering wherever and whenever possible. So let's say you have that collision, there's an exchange, there's a volley, and just as you back up, your body's already recovering, your heart rate is dropping so that you're improving in accuracy and performance. You're not trying to catch your breath. Your nervous system has taken over because you've rewired it. So with biofeedback, the first and most critical aspect of this is taking control of maximum heart rate so that once you crest above that, then you can drop beneath that. How do you do that? Well, you need technology. You need some technology. I never go cheap on my athletes. I try and get the most expensive and most accurate equipment possible. I'm not here to sell you a heart monitor, so the type is not important. The quality is important. If you have the right band that won't slip or move on your athlete or on yourself, that it can detect what the heart rate is consistently, regardless of whether you're grappling or striking or doing MMA or in your conditioning, and most importantly in your conditioning, then when you hit maximum heart rate, when you hit your maximum heart rate, this will beep. And if it beeps, you have that conditioning bell, the operant conditioning. So you hear the beep and you know, okay, I need to back off, I need to get my heart rate down. You think, well, I have to perform more. You know, as an athlete, that's the first response to this. Well, no, I'm in a crisis. Right now you're conditioning. Right now you're sparring. You're not wearing this while you're fighting. You don't need to do anything but listen to the beep. If your heart rate's over max, you're not performing, your central nervous system is. If your heart rate's over max, you need to take back control of that team of sled dogs. Put breath in the alpha dog and don't sit back and let somebody else steer you. That's just a reflex. It's not your skill. If you want your skill, you need to take control again. So as soon as it starts to beep at above your maximum heart rate, you start your exhalation process of getting beneath that maximum heart rate. And when it beats again, like in between rounds, when you get down to your recovery heart rate, which you've plugged in, you know it's time, you know you've fully recovered, you're fully restored, and it's time to go again. You'll find that the more that you do this, the more that you follow and implement the reset technique into your general metabolic conditioning cycle, the faster that you're going to move from maximum heart rate to your recovery heart rate and get back into the next round. This is simple conditioning, just like Pavlov's dog. So if you hear the bell, if you've been doing it in your conditioning, you'll start to decrease. So what I found is that over time, you don't become dependent upon the technology. The technology gives you an awareness of what's going on in your body. You can feel your blood pounding. So when you feel you're getting close to maximum heart rate, your nervous system has been rewired because of the reset technique, so that you instantly start to go through this reset technique to recover your heart rate. It's the sensation of getting close to maximum heart rate which starts to drop you down. That's why it requires 2 to 4 months of consistent practice. Now, you can right away see instant results, but those results need to latch in. You have to rewire the entire system. That's going to take time. It's operant conditioning. It takes time to create this good habit of knowing what your maximum heart rate is and knowing what your recovery rate is and getting down there as fast as possible if you want 6 times the recovery rate as your opponent. In most sports, but especially in mixed martial arts and submission fighting, recovery is king. Whoever recovers faster is going to win. Now, there are other phenomena that are also attached to it, like your functional heart reserve, which, as you practice this, you'll find that your resting heart rate decreases. So let's say you started your training with a resting heart rate of 80 beats per minute. By removing those excessive tension structures in your body through the vibration technique. You excite the Golgi tendon organ, and the sensory receptors, the muscle spindles start to relax more and allow you to have that stretch reflex faster. What you'll find is that your resting heart rate drops. So let's say it drops 20 beats per minute. So within 2 weeks is typical, is average for my fighters. My athletes will come in, they have a resting heart rate of 80 or 90 beats per minute. It drops down to around 50 or 60. Now their functional heart rate is much larger. The degree that they get to operate in from their maximum heart rate to their resting heart rate is much larger. So if your typical resting heart rate is 120 beats per minute, you come in at 80 beats per minute and your maximum heart rate is 200. And you drop down 30 beats per minute. Now your functional reserve from 50 beats per minute to 200 is 150. That much more performance is available to you, a fifth more. Once you understand how to increase your functional heart reserve, not only do you recover faster, but you have more of a continuum of performance available to you. These 3 aspects, your breathing, your vibration, and the biofeedback, all work to synergize and create the reset technique. In the next section, I'll introduce the technique to you in its components and practice them in the components that I present them to you, because this is the way I found it to work. Until you've mastered this technique, I promise you, most of the ideas, unless I'm missing something, most of the ideas have been tested, tried, and found wanting. This organization is optimal for producing the results that I've produced. And if you want those results, practice the techniques and make sure that you understand each component before moving on. There are 5 components to the reset technique. The most critical, and the reason that this is first, is the realignment. There are both a psychological and a physiological component to realignment. I'll start with the psychological. I call it the predator posture because my emphasis is obviously mixed martial arts and submission fighting, but that's not the only reason. It's because of how we're hardwired. This posture is tied into, it's genetically wired into our recognition pattern, because the only true predator to our species is itself. Humans are our most dangerous predators. Even in the dark, even at long ranges, we can detect this posture. We can recognize the human posture out of nothing. And as soon as we recognize that, our arousal systems start to alarm. So there's a genetic intimidation factor to it. If we detect a threat, the first thing that happens is the central nervous system hijacks, takes over, and starts sending chemical messengers out to tell the endocrine system, okay, here's a threat, we need some extra juice. And it releases that jet fuel into our bloodstream. It does the chemical cocktail dump into our bloodstream and gives us that epinephrine like surge. And as soon as that surge happens, what occurs? That's great if in lieu of no skill, but you are a highly refined athlete. When you have that chemical dump into your system, it hijacks your ability to have 100% access to your skills. because with that chemical surge in your system, it starts to deteriorate your performance, impact your accuracy, because as the blood, there's vasoconstriction, the blood squeezes out and pulls back and shifts the large muscles. So when you need fine motor control, your hands feel like clubs. You don't have the accuracy that you need for the sweet science that is your sport.